The capital of humanity was not in China or Europe in 1221. It was Merve, a city located in the middle of the Karakum Desert in modern-day Turkmenistan. Merve would have appeared on the horizon less like a city and more like a reminder that the world had not ceased to exist to someone stumbling out of that desert, exhausted, dazzled by the sunlight, and certain the earth contained nothing but heat and sand. From a great distance, its turquoise domes were visible. Its walls had stood the test of time. The city's canal system, which was supported by the Merve River, turned the desert into a garden, literally transforming sand into vegetable fields, orchards, and other types of greenery you wouldn't expect to find in the middle of nowhere. And 10 libraries stood in the center of it. 10. Merve had 10 libraries in a time when even one was a sign of extraordinary ambition. The entirety of Persian, Arabic, Indian, and Greek knowledge, science, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, poetry, philosophy, and history was collected, conserved, and expanded by academics who understood they were preserving something invaluable. The Silk Road passed straight through Merve. Every caravan traveling between China and the Mediterranean went through its gates. Every kind of trade, goods, silk, spices, ceramics, glass, silver, and fur flowed through its bazaar. Any idea that wished to move between the eastern and western ends of the known world had to come through this city first. In 1221, London had perhaps 40,000 inhabitants. Paris had about 80,000. Merve had somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million residents. The estimates differ, but either way, the figure is immense. The people of Merve understood exactly what they possessed. They called it the Queen of the World. That was not exaggeration. It was a fair description. However, Merve's greatest asset was also what would finally bring it to an end. The city had grown so prosperous and so profoundly influenced by trade, education, and civilization that it had begun to embrace a subtly perilous notion that the world operated according to its own laws. Because those agreements were reasonable, they survived. Due to their strength, those fortifications survived. That a civilization's complexity served as a kind of defense, that something so sophisticated, useful, and intricately entwined with global trade could never just end. They believed that the walls were made of stone. They were actually based on an assumption. Just over the horizon, beyond the deserts made accessible by Merve's wealth, and beyond the steppe linked by its purposeful trade routes, something ancient had begun to move. It was not a kingdom, and not an empire in any form Merve would recognize. It was something preceding those ideas, entirely something from before the belief that civilization defined how the world worked. It had been waiting in silence, with the steady patience of weather, and it was nearly upon them. Every tragedy starts with a calculation. In 1218, a Mongol trading caravan reached Otrar, a border city of the Khwarezmian Empire. It consisted of 450 merchants carrying goods from across the Mongol realm. It was a formal opening for diplomacy and commerce, a statement that said, "We have arrived, we want to trade, and we are strong enough that this message should be understood seriously." Sultan Muhammad II did not recognize a rising superpower extending an offer. He saw only barbarians. He gave the order to arrest and execute all of the merchants. Genghis Khan sent ambassadors, official diplomatic representatives, as is customary in civilized relations, to pursue justice, but Muhammad II had one of them assassinated. He sent the others back after shaving their beards. In the Silk Road era, trade was essential to civilization. An ambassador was impervious to harm. A beard was a sign of respect. The Sultan had committed 3 unpardonable transgressions in one act. He thought that his adversary shared his fear of distance. The desert would act as a barrier, he thought. He thought that what protected him in the realm of trade and treaties would also shield him from a force that was subject to entirely different regulations. Genghis Khan climbed a mountain alone and stayed for 3 days. Then he descended. He unleashed the biggest military mobilization of the 13th century, 100,000 soldiers, perhaps even more. Chinese siege engineers trained in the assaults on Jin dynasty fortifications. Persian administrators who knew how to manage supply lines over 10,000 miles of steppe, a signaling network that could pass orders faster than any horse could deliver them. This was not merely a horde. It was a system, a machine that had been developing for 20 years, adopting every skill it encountered from every civilization it absorbed. and it was marching toward a city that had labeled it barbaric. There is no better way to describe how the Mongol army moved, almost like a force of nature. It did not move forward along the paths that armies were typically supposed to take. It traversed terrain that, according to military doctrine, no army could. It appeared to be in multiple locations at once at times. The Khwarezmian Empire had built its defenses on the assumption that the Mongols would attack via well-known, dependable routes. Rather, the Mongols simultaneously advanced through, beneath and beyond those routes. Muhammad II ran away. He was unable to assemble and bolster his army. He didn't stay to fight. Rather, he traveled from city to city, leading the Mongols in their pursuit and depleting the resources and spirit of every location he came to. Ultimately, he passed away on a small island in the Caspian Sea in 1221 alone, without his empire and wearing clothing that was not his own. He left his cities to face the impending storm on their own. Merve noticed the smoke coming from Samarkand. There was news about what had happened in Bukhara and Urgench, some of it accurate, some distorted by fear and distance. The eastern threat was no longer merely a dim dot on the horizon. It was positioned at the gates. When the Mongols arrived at Merve's gates, the city faced a choice between resistance and negotiation. At that point, the civilized mind failed for the last time. The scholars, administrators, and merchants who ruled Merve and made it the greatest city in the world observed the black tents of the Mongol encampment and applied the logic they knew. Everyone can be purchased. Every negotiation reaches a breaking point. Any conflict can be turned into a deal if it is handled correctly. They believed the Mongols were playing the same game, but with a different advantage. They weren't playing the same game. Tolui, Genghis Khan's youngest son and commander of the Merve operation, accepted the city's offer to negotiate. He agreed to the terms. He assured the governor that if Merve surrendered peacefully and its population gathered outside the walls, there would be mercy. What Mujir al-Mulk didn't realize, what he couldn't understand from within the city's logic, was that Tolui's mercy was contingent not on what Merve did, but on what the Mongols expected Merve to demonstrate. Merve was going to be the lesson, the example that would travel to every unconquered city. This is what happens when you are made an example. Mercy to those who surrendered before it became necessary to destroy them. Complete erasure of those chosen to make the point. Merve has been chosen. On the 6th day, the golden gates of Merve slowly opened with a groan. They were not knocked down by a battering ram. Rather, the people inside opened them on the governor's orders. A delegation appeared, dressed in their finest garments, carrying trays filled with jewels, gold, silk, silver vessels, the queen of the world's movable riches. When the jewels were delivered to the Mongol officers, they were examined, recorded, and divided up. None of it changed what had already been decided. They accepted it with the cold efficiency of men handling inventory rather than negotiating a bargain. You cannot negotiate with a storm once it has arrived at your door. Merve's entire population, between 500,000 and 1 million people, was forced to flee the city and settle on the plains. The selection process lasted several days. Engineers, weavers, and metal workers were selected and sent to other parts of the Mongol Empire. In some ways, they would survive. They would spend the rest of their lives producing goods for others. The students, the physicians, the astronomists, the writers of poetry, the administrators who kept the canal system, libraries, and trade routes running, people with skills tied to the institutions they served. Tolui saw no need for the administrators of a civilization he was destroying. The libraries were the last to be addressed. Some manuscripts were removed, first the easiest to carry and most obviously valuable, while an unknown number went east and eventually surfaced in libraries in Karakorum or Tabriz, where their languages were no longer understood. A library is more than just manuscripts. It is a room in which manuscripts exist in relation to one another, cared for by those who are familiar with the collection and accessible to scholars who understand how to use it. Without those people, the manuscripts are just objects stored in a building. The institution was coming to a close. The remaining manuscripts were left without the institution that gave them meaning. Then they were thrown into the river. According to medieval sources, the Murghab River remained black for several days. Not from blood. from ink. The following event wasn't a battle at all. It was an obliteration. The Mongols had no interest in Merve's gold because they had already claimed it. They wanted to completely erase the city's memory. They dismantled the libraries, demolished the structures that could be demolished, and rerouted the canals. After that, they let the desert finish the job, which it was quite good at. Within a week, 1 million people vanished from existence. Merve was never rebuilt, which is a part of the story that many people miss. The site stayed in place. The Mergub continued to flow. The Silk Road still passed through the area. The land could still be irrigated. Nothing physical prevented the city's restoration. However, a city is more than its location. A city is its people. More specifically, the shared specialized knowledge they possess. The engineers were responsible for keeping the canals operational. The administrators who oversaw the trade routes. The libraries were maintained by scholars. When those people left, deported, scattered, or killed, the knowledge required to sustain the city vanished with them. The canals filled with silt, the headworks broke down, the fields became dry. The Silk Road went elsewhere. In a single generation, the desert had reclaimed what had taken centuries to form. Merve now only exists as a collection of brown mounds in Turkmenistan's Karakum Desert. These mounds are the washed-away remnants of mud brick buildings, the result of centuries of construction returning to the land that produced them. Archaeologists have been excavating the site since the 19th century. They've discovered coins, ceramics, and manuscript scraps that survived by chance because they were buried at the perfect depth. They could see the outlines of abandoned buildings in the compacted ground. They also find remnants of previous daily life in the rubble, such as a merchant's seal, a child's toy, and the base of a library shelf. Merve now has no residents. The nearest habitation is several miles away. The desert surrounding the mounds is vast, flat, and hushed, and the mounds wait in the stillness of ruins, as if they have no choice but to wait. Merve did not collapse because it was fragile. In fact, it was remarkably well supplied. It collapsed because the people leading it had never truly considered the possibility that their civilization might be destroyed, not merely harmed, not merely conquered, but brought to an absolute and permanent end. Its libraries were filled with historical accounts. The scholars of Merve knew of the fall of Rome, the downfall of the Han dynasty, and the collapse of the Achaemenid Empire. The records of every great civilization undone by unforeseen events were there on the shelves, open and accessible. Yet that knowledge did not save them, because understanding disaster and truly believing it could happen to you are two very different things. A civilization is only as strong as its ability to perceive the world as it really is, rather than as it hopes it to be. The hunger of the steppe cannot be held back by the walls of a library. That is the lesson people always extract from Merve. But I would like to add one thing. They did not merely forget the steppe. They forgot what a city really is. A city is not its buildings, its libraries, its domes, or its irrigation channels. A city is a compact. It is an understanding among those who live there about what merits upkeep, what merits defense, and whether the shared creation is worth the expense of sustaining it. Mujir al-Mulk made a choice. He concluded that the city had greater value as an institution that endured than as one that could be defended. He was not wrong about the choice itself, but about who he believed he was dealing with. He assumed the Mongols were part of the same negotiation. Unfortunately, they were not. Today, what was once the greatest city of the Middle Ages is now only a line of brown mounds rising from a quiet desert. The Silk Road no longer crosses it. Its 10 libraries are gone. Its canal gardens are gone. 1 million people are gone too, along with their children and grandchildren, through 800 years of emptiness. And the question those mounds seem to pose, in the stillness of the Karakum, is the same one every great city should ask itself when it feels most certain of its own lasting power. What have we chosen to defend? And have we made that answer clear to the people who live here?